Australia, the land of endless beaches, laid-back living, and the promise of a better life. For decades, it's been one of the world's top destinations for migrants. But something unusual is happening. People aren't just arriving, they're leaving, and they're not heading back home. Many are packing their bags for one small, hyper-efficient city-state, Singapore. Why would someone trade the wide-open spaces of Australia for one of the most densely populated countries on Earth? The answer says a lot about the future of work, migration, and where opportunity really lives. 1. The high cost of living in Australia versus Singapore's strategic advantage. Let's start with the thing everyone feels first, the cost of living. In Sydney and Melbourne, housing prices have gone from high to almost impossible. In early 2025, the average house in Sydney topped 1.6 million Australian dollars, and that's before you factor in interest rates, which have been climbing. Rents? They've jumped more than 20% in just 2 years, pushing many families to the edge. Now compare that to Singapore. Yes, it's famously one of the most expensive cities in the world. But here's the twist. Over 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built HDB flats. Prices are regulated, and subsidies mean that even in a dense global city, home ownership is still possible for the middle class. Day-to-day expenses tell a similar story. In Australia, groceries and utilities have surged far beyond wage growth. In Singapore, while some things cost more, the efficiency of public transport, the healthcare system, and subsidies in areas like housing create a stability that many new arrivals say makes city life more predictable. For many migrants, that stability matters more than the headline expensive city label. On the ground, it can actually feel more affordable, especially if you're earning in the right sectors. But it's not just about cost, because for many, Singapore offers something Australia can't: the right job at the right time. 3. Mental health and belonging, Australia versus Singapore. Even if you manage to survive the cost of living and land a job, there's another hurdle. One that's harder to measure, but just as real: belonging. For many migrants in Australia, the dream starts off full of hope. Barbecues by the beach, clean cities, friendly neighbors. But once the honeymoon phase fades, a quiet reality sets in. It's not that people are unkind. It's that friendships, trust, and opportunities often flow along long-standing networks: school friends, sports clubs, and family ties that go back generations. And if you're new, those doors don't open easily. The isolation is subtle at first. A missed invitation here, a joke you don't quite get there. But over time, it builds into something heavier. Without strong local networks, you can feel like an outsider, even after years of living in the country. For skilled migrants, it's a strange paradox. You're qualified enough to enter, but not connected enough to thrive. Add in the stress of high rent, job uncertainty, and the pressure to send money home, and mental health starts to crack. Data from migrant advocacy groups shows that immigrants in Australia report higher rates of anxiety, depression, and burnout compared to the general population. Many push through, but some quietly pack their bags and leave, telling themselves it's not worth the toll on their well-being. Singapore, on the other hand, operates on a different social rhythm. It's not a utopia. Life is competitive, fast-paced, and expectations are high. But for many newcomers, the integration feels smoother. Why? Because in a city where more than a third of the population is foreign-born, being from somewhere else is normal. You're surrounded by people who've also had to navigate new systems, new foods, new rules. In Singapore, your colleagues, your neighbors, even your boss, chances are they've walked a similar path. This creates a kind of unspoken camaraderie. You might still face culture shock, but you're far less likely to feel like you're knocking on a door that no one will open. And because the country's infrastructure and community spaces are designed for a diverse population, there's less of that outsider versus insider dynamic. That shared experience doesn't erase the challenges. Migrants in Singapore still face long hours, high expectations, and the occasional bout of homesickness. But for some, the feeling of being woven into the city's fabric, rather than existing on its fringes, is worth more than a bigger backyard or a higher paycheck. Still, belonging alone won't keep people in one place. Because in the end, migration is a game of rules, and the policies of a country can make or break someone's future. 4. Immigration policy shifts. If there's one thing migrants value almost as much as a good job, it's certainty. And in this area, Australia and Singapore are telling two very different stories. In Australia, the path to permanent residency has grown longer and more complex. What was once a relatively smooth process can now stretch for 5 to 10 years. And that's if you meet the point system's evolving requirements. Skilled professionals can find themselves caught in a cycle of temporary visas, unsure if the rules might change halfway through their journey. This limbo affects more than just careers. It shapes whether people buy a home, start a business, or even have children. Singapore, on the other hand, offers a model that is both clear and strategic, though still competitive. Its work visa pathways are tightly linked to national needs. For in-demand roles in sectors like tech, finance, and healthcare, processing can take weeks, not years. While permanent residency in Singapore is far from automatic, the timeline is predictable and the steps are transparent. This policy clarity makes a difference. Families can map out their future with confidence. They know whether they'll need to move in 3 years or if they can commit to building a life. And when that certainty is paired with the sense of being actively sought after, rather than just tolerated, it's a powerful pull factor. In migration, the rules aren't just paperwork, they're signals. They tell people whether they're seen as a burden or as an asset worth keeping. 5. The brain drain. It's not just immigrants leaving Australia. Australians themselves are packing up and heading overseas. And increasingly, one of the destinations catching their eye is Singapore. For decades, the flow of skilled professionals was mostly one way, with Australia attracting talent from across the globe. But today, doctors, engineers, and tech specialists are crossing the reverse bridge. In healthcare, nurses and specialists are moving to Singapore for better pay packages and lighter bureaucratic loads. In finance, mid-career professionals are finding they can climb the ladder faster in Singapore's leaner, high-growth banking sector. And in tech, the city-state's thriving startup scene, backed by government incentives and venture capital, is luring Australians who feel stifled by slower-moving corporate environments back home. The appeal is partly professional and partly personal. Singapore's efficient transport, low crime rates, and globally connected business environment make it a comfortable launchpad for ambitious careers. The fact that it sits at the crossroads of Asia also gives Australians direct access to fast-growing markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, and India, opportunities that are harder to tap into from Sydney or Melbourne. If Australia's best and brightest keep leaving, the long-term consequences could be serious. Skills shortages in key industries would deepen. Innovation pipelines could slow, and the global perception of Australia as a magnet for talent could fade, replaced by the image of a country struggling to hold on to its own. Singapore, meanwhile, is quietly collecting this human capital, adding their expertise to its already competitive economy. In a world where talent is the ultimate currency, that's not just migration. That's a transfer of power. 6. The impact on Australia. When skilled migrants and homegrown professionals leave, the effects ripple far beyond the individuals themselves. For Australia, the immediate concern is labor shortages in sectors that keep the country running: healthcare, agriculture, construction, and hospitality. Hospitals already stretched thin face longer wait times. Farms struggle to find seasonal workers, threatening food supply chains. Businesses in regional towns risk closing simply because they can't find staff. Economically, every skilled worker who departs takes with them years of training, experience, and future tax contributions. This is brain drain in its purest form, the kind that not only leaves gaps in the workforce, but also slows the country's capacity to innovate and adapt. When tech talent leaves, startups lose their edge. When researchers move abroad, breakthroughs happen elsewhere. Culturally, the loss is just as significant. Immigrants bring fresh perspectives, diverse networks, and the ability to bridge Australia to global markets. Losing them, along with the Australians who seek opportunities elsewhere, risks making the country less dynamic, less globally connected, and less competitive. Singapore, by contrast, is actively absorbing this talent. Each departure from Australia is a potential arrival in Singapore. And with every arrival, Singapore strengthens its economy, broadens its cultural capital, and deepens its reputation as a global hub. If this trend continues, the talent gap between the two nations won't just be about numbers. It will be about momentum, with Singapore pulling ahead while Australia plays catch-up. The bigger picture. Step back from the individual stories, and a larger pattern begins to emerge. Australia and Singapore are playing two very different games in the global competition for talent. Australia, for all its lifestyle appeal, is struggling to align its immigration, housing, and job market realities with the needs of a rapidly changing world. Rising costs, uncertain visa pathways, and bottlenecks in employment are creating friction for the very people it needs most. Singapore, meanwhile, operates with a surgical precision. It knows exactly which sectors need talent, and it designs policies, housing models, and infrastructure to attract and retain those people. It's not about being cheaper than Australia. It's about being faster, clearer, and more rewarding for ambitious professionals. In a world where mobility is easier than ever, that clarity becomes a competitive weapon. This isn't just a story about two countries. It's a window into the future of migration itself. The global workforce is becoming more fluid, less tied to geography, and far more willing to relocate when opportunities align. The nations that win won't necessarily be the richest or the biggest. They'll be the ones that treat skilled migrants not as a political talking point, but as an asset to be nurtured. If Australia can't adapt, it risks watching more of its talent, both foreign-born and native, walk out the door, often straight into Singapore's open arms. And once that momentum shifts, getting it back is far harder than most governments like to admit. Conclusion. When you line up the facts, a clear picture forms. Migrants aren't just chasing higher paychecks or sunnier skies. They're searching for a place where their skills are valued, their future feels secure, and their quality of life matches their effort. Australia still has enormous appeal, world-class cities, natural beauty, and a multicultural society. But rising costs, sluggish policy processes, and mismatched job opportunities are slowly eroding that shine. For many, the dream of Australia is becoming harder to sustain. Singapore, on the other hand, has built a reputation as a place that moves quickly, plans strategically, and rewards ambition. It's not perfect. Competition is fierce, and life can be intense. But for skilled professionals who want clarity, opportunity, and infrastructure that works, it's proving to be a magnet. The bigger question is what happens next? Will Australia recalibrate to keep the talent it needs? Or will Singapore and other agile nations quietly win the global race for skilled workers? Because in the end, migration isn't just about crossing borders. It's about finding the one place where you can see your future clearly and actually get there.